All right, assalamu alaikum everybody. I hope you all are doing super duper crystal clear and welcome back to the second demo class of our past paper session here at Conceptuals Academy. So today we will be continuing from the part where we left. Yesterday we were exploring the specimen paper 2B, where we sort of solved the first how many questions? 12 questions. And right now we will be going on to the 13th question of the paper, which is apparently the most challenging, the most sort of question which everyone is scared of. And we call that the 15 marker scenario question. Now, first and foremost, thingy, I hope you all are aware that this is a demo class for our past paper session. So if anybody of you wants to join in and they haven't filled out the form as of now, you are required to let Ma'am Naiba know. I'm sharing the number of Ma'am Naiba up here. You guys can just text Ma'am Naiba and can let her know if you are interested in joining our past paper session. We will be just like this, continuing the classes. So the number is +92 318 177 2015. So 92318177215. You can text Ma'am Naiba and she can provide you with all the further details if you haven't filled out the form as of now. If you have, then Ma'am Naiba will be inshallah ta'ala reaching out to you in over the weekend. So yeah, apart from that, I hope you all have also took the other classes offered at the academy. I would highly recommend that you also take the demo classes offered by other teachers because conceptuals at the end have decided to basically bring the best in the market for you all so that you all are ready to ace all your exam papers. For today, let's start off with our content. We will be inshallah ta'ala solving this 115 marker, but the main focus of this 15 marker will not be just writing the solution of it, but rather I would wish every one of you to understand how to fundamentally solve a 15 marker. So you have to, let's say, start off with a question. Whenever I want to start off with a 15 marker, first and foremost thing is कभी जल्दी नहीं करनी सही है. I even mentioned this last night that you need to keep at least 1 hour for your 15 marker. If you don't take out 1 hour, then there's a great risk that if a tricky sort of question comes up, you can sort of mess it up, which I don't want you all to mess. And for that reason, you will be taking out at least 15 minutes and those 50, at least 1 hour. And out of that 1 hour, you need to basically first of all devise the first 15-20 minutes making a plan. How do you craft a plan and how do you craft an ideal plan? That is what we will be studying right now. So let's start off with reading a question. Now for a 15 marker, you should have a pencil, right? And why? Because it's really important that you need to underline some fundamental thingies. So for instance, let's start off with reading this question, which sort of says that the names of patient are stored in a one-dimensional 1D array patient. So the examiner themselves clarified that we are having a one-dimensional array which has the name of patient. And this patient array, anything which is important, I'm sort of going to be highlighting it with purple for now because we need to create a scenario first, right? This 15 marker is a scenario based question, which means that if we are unable to create a scenario here, it's going to be very difficult. And we can clearly see that this specific array stores the names of the patients. So wherever I would be always in a paper like this, I need to create a rough place where I can do my working, right? So I might do my rough working up here. Let me write rough up here. Say, so you need to have a rough page like this to do all your relevant working whenever you're doing a 15 marker, whether it's small part up here. So like when I gave my exam minute, to ye sare ke sare, all this white spaces I sort of made use of all these places to make my rough model. But if you want, you can also do it maybe at the very end. But it's recommended that do it up here, write it clearly rough work. And once you are done with all the rough work you do on the paper, always cancel it up using a pencil or using a pen like this so that the examiner knows that okay, this was just rough work. So yeah, but now let's assume we want to solve this question and this is my rough place. So every time you read an important point on the question, you directly need to write it down so that you don't forget. A lot of you, when solving the 15 markers, they have this one really common problem that they always say, sir, हमारा तो एक मसला ये हो रहा है कि the biggest problem we are facing while solving a 15 marker is that sir हम एक चीज करें and then eventually we forget that okay, we also had to do that thing. And that problem is really serious, and I have been feeling, and I personally, when I was preparing for my exam back then, this was a very serious problem. And eventually, if you're realize that you missed something towards the end, then sorry, but making a recovery from that point, especially in a paper where you don't have a lot of time, is very difficult. So it's really important that you make use of this rough section and make and write every important point which you see while giving it a first read. So up here in the first line, we saw that whenever I want to access my names of the patients, there is an array with the name of patient, and that can give me access to a specific patient. So now I'm going to be writing something like, okay, if I want to access the name of patient, now up here I'm going to make it very neat so that you all can understand it. Exam ke andar it's not necessary that you make it this neat, it's up to you, no matter how you want to make a plan for you, right? So we can do that using my patient array. So now I know that everywhere in the question, wherever it says that you need to output the name of a patient, you might want to access the name of the patient or whatsoever, you don't need to think, yeah, do I need to take an input for it? Do I need to do that? Do I need to do that? No, I have clearly mentioned wherever I'm going to see the word name of patient, this means I need to refer to the array which is having the name of patient. Now let's go on to reading the next line. The second line says that a separate two-dimensional array. It clearly mentions a two-dimensional array which has the name of readings, and this readings array stores the latest data recorded about each patient. Okay, clearly understood. Then it says that the array already contains the readings taken by a nurse for each patient. What does this one line means? This specific line is really important. Now this question, you might be having this question in your mind, and also a lot of the students, when they send me their 15 marker, what the biggest problem they do is they sort of tend to take input. Remember, in most cases in a 15 marker, you are not required to take an input. The values which you are going to have in an array, the values which you might have in some sort of a variable, they're sort of pre-initialized. So it's very rare that you are asked to take an input, right? It's really, really very rare. In this case, they did not tend to mention the word directly that, okay, your array has been initialized or it has the values beforehand. What they did was they said that the array already, you can see it's clearly bolded, the array already contains the readings taken by a nurse for each patient, which apparently means that both the readings array and the patient array, they both already have the relevant data inside it, which means that if a specific array or a specific variable already has data inside it, there is no need to take any external input again. This sort of simplifies the model to a very good extent, because now that confusion of whether I need to take an input or not, that has been clarified. There is no need to take an input at all. But now let's go back to our notes, and now in our notes we will be writing that, okay, there is this array with the name of readings. But what does this array store? Let's read it. It says that the array already contains the readings taken by a nurse for each patient. What readings? Point number one, temperature measured to 1 decimal place and pulse rate as a whole number. This means that this readings, which is basically a two-dimensional array, we know that a two-dimensional array can basically store multiple values within the same table, right? It's like the normal shelf table we have. And if I have to sort of depict the model for you, this person is trying to show that there is basically a specific 2D array, which is something like this. Let's make a straight line like this. Then let's make a line like this. Let's make a line like this. And you are required to make a diagram like this on your paper if you want to understand it the right way. This is what we are talking about. We have a 2D array with the name of reading. So if I have to make a title for this, it's going to be that this array is my readings array, which is a two-dimensional array. And this two-dimensional array has been storing two values. Firstly, the first column, because this point comes as the first value, because this comes as the first point, we're going to say that this value is the one which will be stored in the first column. So this first column is storing the temperature values of all the patients, whereas this pulse rate is, because it's the second point up here, we can take this assumption that, okay, because it's second up here, we can also find out that this pulse rate values for each patient will be mentioned up here. But now you might be having this question in your mind, sir, how did you get to know that temp and pulse are supposed to be written on the column wise and not up in the row wise? So remember one tip of mine. This is really, really important and will help you understand almost all of your 15 markers. Whenever you have a 15 marker which includes 2D arrays, or even a one-dimensional array, the one which we have up here, all the rows which we have, these are rows, right? These horizontal, all the rows are usually used for a specific entity. That is even how we define it in the chapter number 9 databases topic, that a row or a record is for a specific entity, which apparently means that all this value up here, these two values, are for a same person. So I can say that person number 1, so the values of person number 1 are going to be in this row. So the temperature for person number 1, let's say 75, the pulse rate for person number 1. So both these two values are basically corresponding to person number 1. So whenever you want to create a model where you have a specific person and then there is some relevant values to that person, the specific values which are being stored, they are always going to go as column. So whenever we have some sort of values, the values are always going to go into column, whereas if there is a specific person count, like person number 1, person number 2, person number 3, they are going to go into the rows count. So this is really important, because if you had this question, sir, why not create temp up here, pulse up here, and write person number 1 up here, person number 2 up here, person number 3, and so on. So it's wrong for this reason. अब आपको क्लियर हो जाना चाहिए that whenever we have some temperature which is being noted, those are going to go into column, and if there's a person entity, that's going to go into row. Just like this, we saw that we also have one other patient name array. Let's also draw that, because it's further going to simplify the model for us. Whenever you have arrays, it's better to always draw it. So let's draw the array up here for patients too. So we're going to create a straight line like this of the same size, let's say, and let's make it up here. Let's connect this, and boom. This is basically my patient array. Now I know that this patient array basically stores the names, whereas the readings array stores the relevant temperature and the pulse of a specific patient. Now let's continue reading the question and see what's next in the question. So if I further continue, the question says that temperature readings should be in the range 31.6 to 37.2 inclusive. What does the keyword inclusive mean? Remember, whenever in computer science or wherever you hear the word inclusive, this basically means that the values which have been stated to you within this range, these are also included. So if I say that 31.6 to 37.2 is basically the normal range, because it says that temperature should stay in between this range, this means that if a person has the temperature of 31.6, that's perfectly normal. And if a person has a temperature of 37.2, that's also perfectly normal. Anything outside these two boundaries will be counted something invalid or abnormal. And if a question marks the word exclusive, like for instance, if it mentioned something like, because these classes are not just to solve these papers, but also to make you understand these common terminologies an examiner might be making use of. If the examiner uses the word exclusive, this means that 37.2 and 31.6, they are not included, which apparently means that if the exclusive word was used up here and the temperature was something like 37.2, this would not have been a normal value. Say this is a really important point you should be clear on. So now we know that the temperature readings should be between this, and then it's going to be normal. Let's write this up here too. So the valid range for temperature is going to be what? 31.6 to 37.2. Perfect. This is going to be my normal range. Now let's continue the question. The next statement says that the pulse readings for a specific patient should be in the range 55 to 100 inclusive again, which apparently means that if it's between these values, we are good to go. So let's also write this. Pulse should be between 55 to 100. And this will eventually allow us to say that it's also normal. Boom, perfectly fine. Now it says that a hospital number is given to the patient. The hospital number given to the patient is basically used for the index on both arrays. Now, whenever we say the word index, this basically means that we are talking about the position in an array. Now, for instance, in this array, we have multiple rows, right? I can say that we can have 25, 30 up here, 40, 20 up here, 70, 10 up here, and blah, blah, blah. We might have a lot of values in either of the array. But how will I get to know that, bro, this specific row corresponds to the information for patient number 1, patient number 2, patient number 3, and all that stuff? For that, we have a specific word known as index. This index is the computer science word which specifies the position of a specific value within an array. Now the examiner, they always make these 2D arrays and 1D arrays combination in a 15 marker very easy for us by telling us, and you're going to note this, that when I say that the pattern for the 15 marker is sort of repeated in almost all the papers, if you go and open up every other 15 marker, they always make use of the same index on both arrays. Now, this terminology that they say that the patient is used, the specific hospital number is basically used for the index on both arrays. And this value needs to be between 100, 1 and 1000 inclusive. What does this mean? This basically means that the specific position of a specific person, I know you will have questions up here, just a minute. Let me explain this and फिर आप लोग से questions में पूछता हूँ. What this means is that if a specific person has the hospital ID 1, which apparently indicates that this is my position number 1, let's say this is my position number 1, then the name which is at position number 1 up here in the patient array, it is the same as, it's basically, if I have the name up here, like for instance Mars, then because it has the patient hospital ID number as 1, and we said that the index for both the arrays is going to be the same hospital number, then this simplifies the scenario for us, because this row on the right hand side in the readings array now also stores the same values for the patient Mars. So if I have Mars name up here and the index number is 1 and temperature is 60 up here, and let's say the pulse is something like 75, then this pulse value 75 and this temperature value 60, both these values are basically corresponding to the person who has the name Mars. And how do I get to know this? Because we said that every person, whoever's name is going to go into this patient array and whoever's data is going to go into the readings array, both of them data could be uniquely identified by something known as hospital ID. So for instance, if there is a patient with the name of Mars and he got an ID number 1, hospital ID number 1, then we said that in patient array, the index should be hospital ID. So hospital ID for Mars is going to 1, which is going to be same 1. So if it's the array patient, even in the patient array, you're going to see that if I got allotted the patient hospital number as 1, then my name is going to be placed at position number 1, or I can say at index position 1. And just like that, because the other array is also going to be making use of the same hospital number as a as an index identifier. So because my hospital ID for Mars is still going to be 1. So my relevant data for whatever my tests are, for whatever my temperature and whatever my pulse rate is, they will also be stored at position number 1. So this has sort of simplified my question to a very good extent, because what this did was it ensured that if in readings array I have some value stored up, that value, whatever position for that value is, let's say position number 1, if I go to the patient array and in that I also go to position number 1, the name is stored for that specific patient जिसकी values हमने यहाँ पे store किया. So this sort of explains how that the value of 60 and 75 corresponds to the same patient name Mars. And why? Because we said that the index which will be used, that is the hospital number. So this hospital number is going to stay the same. So let me write up here hospital number, because if I am being admitted to a hospital and I have to basically mention my hospital number on alongside my name. So if I, let's say, get hospital number 62, so my tests will also be including that I am on bed number 62, and let's say my name array will also indicate that I'm on bed number 62. So this means that if I indicate that I'm, let's say, on bed number 62 and on bed number 62 the patient name is Ahmed, then in the other array which we created as readings, in that readings array the temperature for Ahmed will be stored and the pulse rate for Ahmed will also be stored, because the test for the specific patient is also stored at the same index as that in which his name is being stored. So we say that if I now want to access, let's say temperature for Ahmed is 80 and the pulse rate is something like 105. So now if I want to access the data from here and I want to access this 105, it's pretty much clear that okay, this 105 is the data of the patient who is at position number 62. So this 62 is corresponding to both of them. So it sort of explained this model for me that okay, that whatever index I have for both of the two arrays, whether it's for the patients or whether it's for the readings, Either way, if the index number is same, it's going to correspond to the same patient. If we are talking about patient but with an index number of 1, it's going to give me what? The name of the patient. But if I do readings and I make use of the index number 1, then it's going to be providing me, given that I just use this as my first parameter because it's going to be 2, so दूसरे वाले को तो छोड़ दो. But for now, if I, let's say, take my main row as 1, then it's going to be providing me with the same values of that specific patient. Now, I'm going to open up the chat box. I'm going to see कि आप लोग की कोई questions है. Yes, yes, the recording will be uploaded. Don't worry, don't worry. Say, okay. If exclusive words were written instead of inclusive, so like would every number be considered normal instead of 31.6 and 30? Or be normal ko chodo for now, just sort of take this model that if we say that a word exclusive is included, this basically means that that value is not included in it. That value is not included in it. Say, so yes, you're perfectly fine कि मैं यही बोलूंगा कि 31.6 and 37.2 is not included. It's not within the normal range. सही है? Okay, so any other questions? Sir, can you give 2 minutes to look at the question? Of course, जब तक मैं questions आपको explain questions ले रहा हूँ, you guys can have a look at it if you were late. Okay, so other question is exclusive, inclusive. Exclusive वो होगा जो कि include नहीं होगा. Inclusive means that these two values are also included. Exclusive means that these two values are not included within the relevant range. सर चैट बॉक्स का है कोने में, बस आप यहाँ पे मुझे मैसेज करें. सही है? Alright, perfect. No other important. Huzaifa ka question hai. Where is Huzaifa? Huzaifa. I can't see your name. Okay, perfect. Done. Iman, you have a question? Who is Iman? Sir, won't that make the array have one more column like the 1D array turns 2D with that? नहीं रुको अभी के लिए तो रुको ना. That's just to explain the concept. We're gonna come to that. So yeah, for now, just understand the concept because this thingy is very very fast paced. इसको 2 मिनट में आप लोग ने analyze करना है. But why am I taking it so slow? So that you can understand what's happening. Until or unless you don't understand this model, literally solving a 15 marker is very challenging. So the main focus of these classes is to make you understand how to craft this ideal plan, and then उसके बाद ही आप लोग अच्छे तरीके से इसको solve कर सकोगे. Alright, so now let's continue and see कि आगे अब हमने क्या करना है. You need to solve this 15 mark in around about what do we call it, 1 hour. So now I'm just going to keep the chat box closed once again, and फिर उसके बाद I'm going to retake the questions again after some while. So now let's continue. The question says that when the data for a patient is checked, a warning is given. If any of the readings are out of range, then a warning is given. So I got to know that if any of the values are out of the range, what's the range? The range is that if it's between 31.6 and 37.2, and if it's 55 and 100 के दरमियान, then it's normal. But if anything goes out of this range, then this means that it's out of the relevant range. If any of these two values, okay, if either this goes out of the range or this goes out of the range, if any of the two values goes out of the range, then you need to issue a warning. So this means that अगर एक value गलत जाती है and it goes out of the range, I'm going to give a warning. And if both of the readings are out of the range, in that case, I need to give a severe warning. Okay, so these are two other important aspects. I got to know that this is what I need to do. Now let's go on and read the requirements. If you remember, and if you have taken the marathon class which we conducted last week, we talked about how these requirements are what will get you those marks in the 15 marker for assessment objective number 2. So if I read the requirements, it says that you need to write a procedure. Important point. This basically means that everything which you need to do in this 15 marker needs to be done within a procedure. So if you don't implement a procedure, then you're going to lose marks. So this is a very important point. And then you can do it whether you want to use pseudocode or program code, and that should meet the following requirements. What are the requirements? Okay, let's read them. So point number 1 says that you need to take the hospital number as a parameter. So our procedure is going to be taking a parameter, and that parameter which it's going to take is going to be hospital number. What's a parameter? Parameter is that specific value which you provide to a procedure. So आप लोगों ने procedure पढ़ा होगा, right? When we were studying procedure in class, we saw that if I create a procedure, it can also take some value alongside it as an input from the user end. So the value which a user provides to a procedure, that is known as a parameter. And in this case, we will be like, okay, the parameter which you need to take is a hospital hospital number. So the user will be providing us with some sort of hospital number, and that hospital number needs to be used within the entire program. Now the second point says that we need to check if the number is valid. How can I check if the number is valid? Okay, we saw up here that the hospital number needs to be between 1 and 1000 inclusive, which means that I need to check whether it is between 1 and 1000 or not. If it's not, तो फिर क्या होगा? Let's see. If the number is not valid, then output an error message and exit the procedure. So they clearly themselves mentioned it that, bro, you need to take an input for a parameter. That parameter needs to be checked whether it's between 1 and between 1000. Yeah, let me see. Yep, between 1 and 1000. So this means that if the value is not between 1 and 1000, I need to basically make a message outputted that, bro, your value is incorrect, and at the same time I will be exiting the procedure because the number is not valid, which, okay, I have understood. Now if the hospital number is, for instance, valid, which means that it is between the specified range of what, 1 and 1000, if it is, in that case I need to implement these 5 steps. Kya? First of all, I'll be outputting the patient names. Now we saw this in the rough page we created, that whenever I want to output the name of the patient, I'll be making use of the patient array, which apparently means that whenever I will be doing this, I need to deal with the patient's array name. Okay, then I'm going to see that if both the readings are within the range, which apparently means that I need to take the value for a specific patient. I need to see whether the temperature is within this range and also whether the pulse is also within the range. So I'm going to check, like for instance, I go up here, I would be like, okay, let me access Mars's temperature and pulse values. I would be like, okay, is this temperature value of this patient Mars, is it between this relevant range 31.6 and 37.2? If it is, and at the same time my pulse value is also within the perfect range, then I will be outputting what? I'll be outputting normal reading. So if both are fine, then I would be outputting normal. If let's say the name of the reading, what do we call it, if one reading is out of the range and the other is within the range, in that case I'll be outputting warning. So if you read the second point, it says output warning and the name of the reading, example pulse, if one reading is out of the range, which apparently means that if I look up in this case of Mars, we can clearly see that temperature is out of range, right? Temperature to out of range, the correct range was between 31.6 and 37.2, which means that 60 is way above the limit of 37.2. So this is out of range. But if I look up on the pulse value for the patient, the pulse value for the person is perfectly fine. It's still within the normal range, which means that if a case like this happens where one value is within the range whereas the other is outside the range, then I need to do what? I need to basically output a warning. Okay, perfectly fine. And now I also need to output severe warning and the names of the two reading like pulse and temperature if both readings are out of the range, which for instance means that if I, let's say, have some other patient at, let's say, some index like at position hospital number 2, there is some other patient with the name of, let's say, Mariam, and now Mariam got a temperature of something like 28 and at the same time her pulse rate is something like 50. Now if I look up with the ranges, I can clearly see that 28 is outside the range because the range needs to be between these two values. It's outside this range, so I'm going to say that the temperature is invalid, it's out of the range, and at the same time if I compare the pulse is also beneath the limited or the least amount of value, which means that 50 is also outside the range. Now because both of the two values are outside the range, I need to output a severe warning. Now I sort of have understood what I need to do. I need to take the value of a specific patient. I need to see whether the value is within the specific range. If one of the values is within the specific range and the other is not, I need to output warning. If both of them are within range, I need to output perfectly normal readings. If none of them are in range, I need to output a severe warning. Now ये तो हमने इस scenario को dissect कर दिया. We have successfully dissected the entire scenario and now solving this is not difficult. But before jumping into the code directly, what I would recommend every one of you is that you should understand that how can I now grab the value of a specific person. Now remember, If we have studied that if I, let's say, want to take out the name of some person, I will be doing it using this way, that because the index used in this case is my hospital number, we clearly saw that the hospital number will be taken as an input for the specific parameter, and we're going to be using the same hospital number as an index too, because it's stated in the question for whatever person I want to access. I would be like, okay, go to the array and go to the specific hospital number position. For instance, if I was a patient and my hospital number was 1, so all my relevant values were also stored at position number 1. See, that is how 15 marker, even though it may seem challenging, is there to help you, because they said that okay, make use of hospital number, which is something which may seem like very challenging and oh bhai ye to koi drowny cheez aa gayi, but no, they said that this is going to be your index number. So if my hospital number is 1, in the array at position number 1, your data for Mars will be stored. And then I also get to know that the same one value up here in the other array corresponds to the value and result of Mars again. So the program has been created in a way that if you store the position at position number 1, the name of Mars, you should also add position number 1, because you are storing this values for the same hospital number, and hospital number to either way same hi rahega. So for the same hospital number, store the temperature value and store the pulse value of that patient. So now this 60 and 75 is the pulse value for me. But now because it's a two-dimensional array, we have always studied that accessing data within a two-dimensional array is a bit different. How do you do it? The way of accessing a two-dimensional array's data is that you need to write the row number and the column number. So I would be like accessing it by writing the name, in this case readings. Then within the square brackets, first I will be specifying what row number I want to access, and then I always specify the column number. That's the sort of the syntax of how you basically access a two-dimensional array. If you want to access a two-dimensional array, you always write the row first and then the column first. Exam में बच्चे भूल जाते हैं, सर वो पहले column लिखना था, row लिखना था. Remember, you will have heard this word RC planes, right? किसी को याद ना हो तो GTA YCT सबने खेली है, मैंने भी खेली है. वो एक मिशन होता था जिसके अंदर आपको RC planes के साथ और RC हेलीकॉप्टर के साथ वो जो आपको एक बिल्डिंग के साथ वो करना होता था, तो वो that was like something जो कि सबके जहन में बैठा होगा. So remember from that RC, you always need to write the rows first in a two-dimensional array, and then you need to write the column number. If you do it the other way around, you're going to lose marks. So remember RC word. Now, if I look up here and I, let's say, want to access the temperature values, or let's say the pulse values for a specific patient, मैं किस तरह करूंगा? I need to specify the relevant row number, and then I need to specify the column number. So in this case, if I want to give these columns the values and some numbers, I can say that this can be my column number 1. अब ये मैं खुद ही assumption ले लेता हूँ, because I sort of created this diagram, and from the diagram it's pretty evident that because यहाँ पे first one was sort of its first, so I can say that my column number 1 can be pointing towards the temperature values, and column number 2 could be pointing towards the pulse values. So yes, so even if you aren't able to understand it, आप खुद से assumption ले लेना. You can later on add a comment too for the examiner if you feel like examiner को समझ नहीं आएगी. Remember the purpose of these comments, whether it's the 15 marker or any other question throughout your paper number 2, is to tell the examiner if you're confused at some point or whether you want to explain your code, then you will be adding a comment. Like for instance, I always tell my students this one case, that once there was a question in front of me which said that you need to create an array for a month, okay, which stores the values of, let's say, temperature for a month. Now the problem is a month could have 28 days, a month could have 30 days, and a month could also have 31 days. अब मैं 31 की array बनाऊं, मैं 30 की बनाऊं, या मैं 28 की बनाऊं? So what I did was I created an array of 30 months and I added a comment next to it that assuming all the months are of 30 days. So now the examiner knows that I know the relevant concept, but I took an assumption. So examiner in this case will sort of, if he does not get it, because at the end they are also humans. There have been multiple cases where they did not understand the right code and gave students incorrect marks. So always try your best to write code in a way where the examiner, when they read it, unko clearly pata lage what you are trying to do. So up here, if I now want to access these columns, I can clearly see that this is my column number 1. and this is my column number 2. Now before everybody has this one question, sir हम तो इस तरह नहीं करते, हम तो ये करते हैं कि this is column number 0 and this is column number 1. That is also perfectly fine. सही है, कोई मसले की बात नहीं है. If you want your index values to start from the 0 and go 1, that is also perfectly fine, because your computer somehow also takes 0 as the first value. So like if I say that I want to count how many, for instance, students we have in a class right now. So generally we humans started this way: 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and so on. But if it's a computer would be like 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. So your computer can count the first column as 0 forever. Whenever we talk about computers take the first value as 0. But it's up to you. You can also take it 1. What my advice would be that in most cases it's better to go with 1, until or unless the question has specified that the first index is 0, or like you have been preparing with the 0 index. Otherwise, if you haven't started as of now, and throughout these past paper sessions too, we will try to make use of 1, because उससे थोड़ा easy हो जाता है. If I have, let's say, 100 elements, I need to go from position number 1 all the way to 100. But definitely you all would be aware that if we have, let's say, we want to start from the position 0, then आप 100 te nahi jati, you go till 99, because you don't start counting like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. You are like 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So you sort of, rather than going to 100, you only go till 99. And there are great chances you make mistake in that way. So we will be taking the first counter as 1, and we will be taking the second counter as 2. Okay, counter wali baat to solve ho gayi. That if I, let's say, now want to access the temperature value, if I want to access the temperature value in this readings 2D array, I'll be saying that go to column number 1, because column number 1 is this. This means I'm only taking value from this column. And if I want to grab value from this column, I would be like, okay, आप ये रो नंबर ले लो, and this is my column which you want to access. You get the 60 value, which means that up again on my notes, I would be like, okay, I want to access temperature. So temperature is having the column value 1. Perfect. Now, if this also means that now if I want to access the pulse value, for the pulse value to be accessed, I would be specifying my column number as 2. So I would be like, okay, if I specify 2 up here, whatever the row number is, let's say I do like row number 1 and column number 2. This means that you are trying to access the second column only. That's how our 2D arrays work, right? If your concept for 2D arrays are not clear, I would recommend again going to my YouTube channel. The name is Code Catalyst for those who might have joined later on. Code Catalyst CS, or you can reach out to me later on after the class. I can reshare it with you too. But you go to that channel, go to chapter number 8, recordings. There is a whole playlist on it, and in that playlist I have fully explained all this concept for 2D arrays. Say, and then let's say right now I want to access the second column, then I will be able to access these values: 75, 50, 105. And what are these values? These are my pulse values. So again on my notes, I'm going to write that whenever I want to access the pulse values, I'll be specifying my column value as 2. अच्छा खासा क्लियर हो गया. Which means that if I now need to access some temperature, the temperature will always be accessed this way: readings, and my row number in this case is what? It's my hospital number, right? हमें नजर आ रहा है that the parameter which is being used as my index up here, that's my hospital number. So I'd be like, okay, if I want to access a specific reading, I would be like, okay, go to the readings 2D array, go on to the specific row number of hospital number, जो कि हमने एक parameter के तौर पे लिया हुआ है from the procedure, and we can clearly see it up here too, that this 1, 2, 3 and all the way till 62, all these values are sort of what they are, basically my hospital numbers. We even mentioned it up here, right? So if I want to make it sort of a general model, remember up whenever you're solving a 15 marker, you always need to deal with values such as hospital number, column number, row number, hospital number. You never specify the index in most cases, until or unless, like in this case. Now, if I only want to, let's say, access the temperature, then I know that if I want to grab the temperature from this 2-dimensional array, I will be specifying the column number for temperature. And what's the column number for temperature? It's column number 1. So I'd be like, if you want to access the temperature readings, you need to write the keyword readings followed by the hospital number, and then you need to put 1 next to it. And this specific writing which we just wrote, this will give you the temperature value for a patient who has the hospital number as this. So whatever the hospital number value is inputted by the user, let's say I say that, bro, the hospital number is let's say 62. Okay, hospital number inputted is 62. So your program would be like, okay, go to 62 comma 1, which apparently means go to 62th row, which is this 62 row, and go to column number 1. So you're sort of accessing this 80 value, and that is how you sort of always access values in whatever 15 marker you're trying to solve. If you don't make a model like this, bro, it's going to be very challenging. And just like that, now if I want to access the pulse values, the pulse values will be accessed in a way that I'm going to write the keyword recordings, and rather than specifying my column number as 2 this time, I'll be specifying the row number as hospital number. And uske baad, I'll be specifying the second index as 2, because I clearly said that whenever I want to access the pulse values, I want you to go to column number 2. So I now write 2 up here in the column number section to tell the program that, okay, rather than going to the entire array and to column number 1, you now need to only go to column number 2. And whatever your hospital number is, in this case, if it was inputted as 62, go to 62th row, but rather than column number 1, go and focus upon column number 2. And we can see that this 105 is what? It's my pulse value. So now if whenever I want to compare the values for a specific user, I need to take them out from this. I will be taking out the temperature values using this command, and I will be taking out the pulse values using this command. And both of these two values will be then compared within the range to see what's going to be the output. And if you made it correctly till this point, then the good part is, congratulations, you have solved the 15 marker. I'm going to stop up here and I will be asking you if there are any questions. So if you have any question which is very relevant to what we just discussed, again, if it's not relevant, I will not appreciate it. But if it is relevant, आप लोग अभी मुझे भेज सकते हो. I have turned on the chat so you guys can send me the messages, and only if it's very relevant. If it's clear, to best scene hai. I don't know if you guys can send some reaction or something, but if you can send something like this or maybe some talia shalia, so I would get to know okay, samajh aa rahi hai. Okay, perfect. That's great to know. All right, good. If there are any questions, you can raise your hands. If you have any questions, raise your hand. Sir, why did you call the row named hospital number? Why? Because you see that this row is always my index, right? Row हमारी index होती है ना, that specific position which tell me कि array के अंदर मैंने किधर जाना है. And in the question, they clearly mentioned that your index on both the arrays is going to be hospital number. For that reason, I'm going to say that this index up here is going to be hospital number, and hospital number is my row value. So it's in the question. Okay, so we do have a few questions. Okay. Just a minute. अच्छा इतनी ज़्यादा नहीं है. Good scene है. Let me search for the first one. The moment I answer your question, please lower your hand. Sir, सर तो इसमें एक दफ़ा फॉर ये बाद में कहानी. अभी जो हमने ये डेमो मॉडल बनाया इसके रिलेटेड कोई क्वेश्चंस हो तो वो आप पूछ सकते हो. सही है. हॉस्पिटल नंबर इज द इंडेक्स. बिल्कुल. Sir, can we call the columns temperature and can we call the columns temperature and pulse? No. Your computer does not understand whether this is the temperature, this is the pulse. Like आपके computer को ये तो नहीं पता I am Mars or let's say it's Mohit or whoever. For your computer, it's always zeros and ones. So whenever you want to give a command to the computer, you need to say, bro, go to column number 1, go to column number 2. Your computer doesn't know that it's going to store the temperature values, whether it's going to store the pulse values. They're always going to say that, okay, there are just numerical values inside them. Sir, why didn't you call the row value patient number, or it has to be hospital number? It's hospital number because if you go and read the question clearly gives it a name as hospital number. So because they mentioned it to be a hospital number, तो हम भी examiner की ही demand को follow करेंगे, right? Why go with something else? Then so do we have to write the whole code? Yes, entire procedure के अंदर. अभी उस point पे हम आए नहीं हैं. So any questions which are relevant to this, I would appreciate आप वो करें. Say, sir, when we say hospital number 2, is it going to the HN temp and 2 pulse? It's basically saying that when I write that recordings hospital number 2, this basically means go to the 2D array with the name of readings, and in that, whatever your hospital number is, go to that specific index. For instance, this hospital number value is 2. Go to position number 2 and then grab the value which is at column number 2. So you grab this 50 value. So this whole statement eventually becomes 50. So your computer would be like, okay, I need to process this. So they execute this thingy and it converts into this value which is at this position. So your computer would be like 50. So now if I want to compare this, if I'm like, okay, if this thingy is greater than 31.6, so it's going to be like this whole thing will be converted into the value which is basically 50, right? So it's going to be 50 is greater than 31.6 and boom, आप इस तरीके से इसको solve करते जाओगे. All right, so we have taken a few questions. I hope सबके answer हो गए. We have just Areeb का एक question. and then 5 का. Sir, can you tell the reference of the paper? This is the specimen paper 2B जो हम कल सॉल्व कर रहे थे, वही पेपर है, सही है. Faik Usman, sir, are we taking hospital number as input? No, no, no. We are taking it as a parameter. You see, question says that we need to write a procedure and then the procedure will take the hospital number as a parameter. अब अभी हम इसका कोड लिखते हैं तो आपके जितने बाकियों की ये जो क्यूरीज वगैरह हैं कि ये हो रहा है वो हो रहा है तो वो अच्छे से उसके अंदर सॉल्व हो जाएंगी. सही है कि ये हम कर क्या रहे हैं, ब्ला ब्ला ब्ला. सो sir, our total hospital number is 1,000, right? No, it's not necessary. It's 1,000. The values can be anywhere between 1 and 1,000. And this is just a random value. हमारे पास 1,000 भी हो सकती है, 2,000 भी हो सकती है, 3,000 भी हो सकती है. All right, let's now move on because हमने बाकी भी काफ़ी इसको कंप्लीट भी करना है. So let's continue with the code now. Now we have sort of created this whole model and now guys जो लोग बोल रहे हैं थोड़ा स्पीड अप कर लें और नींद आ जाएगी तो आप लोग को मैं बताते चलूँ कि यार अगर आप लोग की तैयारी थोड़ी सी अच्छी है तो you guys can do these papers on your own. The purpose of these past paper session is to assist those who are unable to understand the 15 markers. If you are still able to understand the 15 markers the right way, then I would appreciate and I would recommend that आप लोग rather than opting for the past paper course आप खुद practice करें, because I never opted for a past paper course, right? लेकिन अगर आपको लग रहा है कि you need help, then in that case I'm here to guide you with the fundamentals. इसको तेजी से करने के लिए I can complete the entire paper number 2 in 40 minutes, right? It's not a big deal for me. I was sort of solving an entire paper जिस 60 मार्क के ऊपर आप घंटा बैठ के लगते हैं ना, मेरे 20 मिनट में हो गया था कल. So for me it's not a big deal. Literally I can cover it up in 5 minutes. And लेकिन आप लोग के लिए कर रहा हूँ so that you guys can understand it. If you don't understand it the right way, फिर आप लोग ही पेपर के दिन कुकोगे. I got a distinction. आप लोग फिर 20 के साथ अगर खुश हो तो मर्जी है. So listen up everything. If you're good to go with the concepts, I would recommend कि आप लोग फिर खुद ही solve करो. Otherwise, stay awaited. We are dissecting everything in great detail and सबके questions अच्छे से solve होंगे. So now let's I was mute. Hassan, if you were trying to call for that, तो thank you very much. If I Hassan अगर इसलिए call करे, thank you, thank you, thank you. So I don't know क्या हो गया था, but I guess you guys can hear me, right? कोई reaction भेज देना for thumbs up if you guys can hear me. All right, perfect, perfect, perfect. Now let's move on and start answering this question. Now, the question says that you need to create and do everything within a procedure, which apparently means that you don't need to take anything as an input. We need to start off with the keyword procedure and usi ke andar sari coding karni hai. So when discussing procedures, the first statement up here says that you do not need to initialize the data in the array. So for all those who might be declaring an array, who might be adding data into it, bro, the question said that you don't need to do it. And if a question says that you don't need to initialize the data in the array, तो आपको इस बात की टेंशन नहीं लेनी कि सर हमने डिक्लेयर करना है या नहीं. You always declare something जो कि बना नहीं है. If something already has data inside it, उसको तो बिल्कुल ही डिक्लेयर करने की जरूरत नहीं है. It's sort of pre-declared. So this line explains upon how there is no need to declare or no need to initialize any sort of values. So अब करना क्या है? Directly jump into it. We're going to write a procedure. So how do you start a procedure? You always write the keyword procedure, which is the indicator that okay, I'm going to be making use of a procedure, and then I will be giving this procedure a specific name. For instance, मैं इसको कोई भी नाम दे दूं, check patient दे सकते हो, anything. Let's give it the name check patient. So I'll be like, okay, create a procedure with the name of check patient, and then the question clearly mentions that this procedure is going to be taking the hospital number as a parameter. So because this is going to be taking the hospital number as a parameter, we're going to make a bracket like this, and this in this I will be like, okay, you give us a parameter which is like hospital num. Hospital num is my hospital, whatever parameter the user will be providing me with. अब hospital number पूरा भी लिख सकते हो if you want to write it hospital num this way. HN लिखना है आपकी मर्जी है, but just indicate that this thingy is my hospital number which the user will be providing to me. And every time you provide a specific parameter up here, you also need to give its relevant data type. So it's clearly mentioned that this is going to be an integer, right? Because it's between 1 and 1000. अब अगर यहाँ पे लिखा होता 1.00 and 1000.00, then it would have been float. So before everybody says कि सर ये float हो सकता है या कोई decimal point वाला हो सकता है, real, sorry, float तो मैं computer science अपने उसके बोलने लगे C++ की, but before all of you sort of spam कि सर real हो सकता है, float क्या है? Float is basically fundamentally C++ के अंदर we call real values as float. So ये रियल हो सकती है या नहीं. So know that because it's 1 and 1000, so it's going to be integer. So I'd be like, okay, take this integer as a parameter. So I'm going to say take this as an input. And now within the code, the first and foremost thing, the first requirement the examiner asks us to implement is to check whether this specific number is valid or not. How will I check it? Now the question clearly mentions that the value needs to be between 1 and 1000. If the value is within 1 and 1000, then you need to do all this, which means that if it is valid, you need to do all this. But if it's not error, then send an error message and then exit the procedure and then do nothing. So अब इसको implement कैसे करना है? Easy thing. They clearly gave us the hint on their own that if the hospital number is valid, do something, which means that the best thing to do up here is to make use of an if statement. So first and foremost thing will be मैं एक comment डाल देता हूँ to explain what I'm trying to do. So every time you try to do something, add a comment. You add a comment by adding 2 slashes, and then you can write something like checking if the hospital number is valid. If the hospital number is valid. Number is valid. So how will you check it? I will be just making use of an if statement. I would be like, okay, if this hospital number is, let's say, greater than 1 or greater than 0, because it says inclusive. So I'll be like, if this hospital number is greater than 0 and at the same time the hospital value or the hospital number is less than 1000 and what is less than 1001. Why? Because इन्होंने बोला है कि 1000 is included. So I'd be like, okay, 1001 से कम हो, which is going to be 1000. If it is less than 1000, or I can even write it other way, इसको अगर मैं लिखना चाहूँ, I can also write it this way: if it's greater than and equal to 1 and less than or and equal to 1000. This is also perfectly fine. सही है? So आप जिसके साथ लिखना चाहें, it's up to you. It doesn't make a difference. So if you do it this way, it's also fine. If it is within the relevant, this statement basically proves that the hospital number is basically valid. And we clearly saw that if it is valid, I need to do all this. Then I should do what? Then start off with the code, and आपने जो भी checking करनी है वो अब हम start करेंगे. Which means that if it's not valid, तो हम कहीं end में इस तरह लिखेंगे that else. If it's not valid, then output that okay, there is some error, and then you can end the procedure. But उस point ने पहुंचने से पहले let's do all these requirements, that if the value is correct, then do what? So first and foremost thing is that they say output the patient name. So we just studied that if I want to output the patient name, I'll be making use of the patient array. उसको किस तरह करेंगे? We're gonna go to the patient array, and I'm gonna write the relevant hospital number which the user gave me as an input up here as a parameter. So I'll be like, okay, output, and then I will be adding quotation marks, and I would say patient name is colon any meaningful, वो आप कोई भी message लिख सकते हो, okay, but it should tend to explain what you are trying to do, and then you are just going to output the name which we'll do by writing this statement, patient hospital number. So मैं array का नाम लिखूंगा which is patient, and then I'm going to specify that you need to go to the index which is at hospital number position. So hospital number num. And this thingy is basically going to go to whatever that patient array, whatever the hospital number of that person has been inputted up here. You go to that specific position, and up there you take the name of that person, and that name is being outputted up here alongside this statement. So it shows up as patient name is, let's say, Mas. Say boom, done. Then The second requirement says that now you need to output normal reading if both the readings are within range, warning if one of them, and all these cases. अब ये हमने check करना है, which means that I need to check if both the values are within this relevant range, then I'm good to go. So अब उसको मैं करूँगा कैसे? So I'll be like, okay, let me check if my value of, let's say, let me first of all check temperature values. So how will I be checking temperature values? I'd be like, if this thingy, if this value which I just have up here, if this value is if this value is greater than and equal to 31.6 and this value is less than and equal to 37.2, then this means that the value is in the normal range. Now let's write this statement. I'd be like, okay, if किस तरीके से हमने एक्सेस करने readings, if readings, and then your first row would be what? Hospital number, right? Just the way we saw. If readings hospital num, comma, because we are accessing the temperature and we saw that to access temperature, we'll be going to column number 1. We'll be like, okay, if readings hospital number 1 is basically greater than equal to 31.6, this means that it's greater than or equal to this, and at the same time, and I say the second value, which is again readings, you can write it this way if there is no space. सही है? अगर आप लोग के ज़हन में हो कि क्या करना है, तो you can continue just next to it, नीचे. And hospital num 1, again temperature, is less than and equal to 37.2, then this basically means that my temperature is basically within range. So this means what? My temperature is within range. So I can add a comment if I want कि यहाँ पे भी डाल सकते हो, अपने understanding के लिए this part basically ensures that temperature is normal. But now it's not only that I need to check temperature, right? It also mentioned that you need to output normal reading when both the readings are within range. Abhi to I just checked temperature, which means that I also need to check and if the pulse readings are also within the range. So how will I do that? I'm also going to continue this by writing the same and statement. So I'll be like, okay, and alongside this, also take the pulse reading, which would be taken by writing the readings array again, go to the same 2D array readings, go to the hospital number position, hospital num, but rather than opting for the temperature column this time, जो कि column number 1 है, we're going to be opting for the second column, which is the pulse column, right? So you go to column number 2. And right now I'm going to check whether it's greater than and equal to, इसको किधर होना चाहिए? Between 55 and 100, right? So if this value is greater than and equal to 55, and at the same time this value is less than 100, let's rewrite it. Readings hospital number, hospital num 2 is basically less than or equal to 100, then this basically tells me that this entire second part of my readings for pulse, they are also normal. Reading is, or reading nahi bol raha, pulse is also normal. And now we clearly know that when pulse and both of the values are normal, then in that case, what do you need to do? You need to output normal readings. So I'd be like, okay, if this thingy is true, then you can output something like output what? You write these quotation marks because it's a string and you say normal readings. Normal readings. And boom, you're good to go. So we just did one requirement. And what did we check? We sort of implemented a model where we took the values of temperature. We were like, okay, if the temperature is within the range, वो कैसे हमने check किया? We know that the range needs to be between 31.6 and 37.1. Rafa, Ryan, I'm going to come to your question just a minute. So we know that the range is going to stay between these two, right? So अब इसको मैं check किस तरह करूँगा? I said that, okay, if the temperature is greater than and equal to 31.6 and at the same time the temperature is less than or equal to 37.2, this means that the value is apparently within this range, right? Which if it is, then this means my temperature is normal. And likewise, I checked the same thing for my readings part too, that if the readings part is also somehow similar, that it's greater than and equal to 55 and the readings is less than or equal to 100, then again this means that it's within the right range, which means that my pulse is normal and my temperature is also normal. And if both of them are normal, the question instructs us to output the normal reading statement. So I did that by writing output normal reading. And just like that, we now need to implement the model for every other case. Now, before moving on, Till this point, I want to take just a few questions. I'm just going to open up the chat box. A very relevant question should be asked by all of you, वरना फिर अच्छा नहीं होगा. So for those who rose their hand beforehand, रेयान आपका काफी क्वेश्चन था, कोई काफी टाइम से यू आर रेजिंग द हैंड, सो यू कैन टाइप योर क्वेश्चन एंड लेट मी नो. सर 15, सर हॉस्पिटल नंबर को एच एन लिख सकते हैं? यस, आप एच एन लिख सकते हैं, कोई मसले की बात नहीं है, बट इट्स बेटर कि अगर आप इसको एच एन लिखो तो ऊपर हॉस्पिटल नंबर ले लो, नीचे कोई पैरामीटर या कोई इस तरीके से आप कोई वेरिएबल बना देना, उसके अंदर ये वैल्यू हॉस्पिटल नंबर डाल देना, वो भी कर सकते हो. वरना इफ यू टेक एच एन अप हियर, add a comment to say that HN is hospital number so that the examiner knows that you are still talking about the same hospital number. Clear? Sir, sequence does it matter? Yes, sequence in this case, no, sequence does not matter. अगर आप इस केस के अंदर नॉर्मल रीडिंग को पहले करते हो या एंड में करते हो, दोनों वार्निंग को पहले करते हो या एंड में करते हो, सिवियर वार्निंग को एंड या पहले करते हो, इट डजेंट मैटर. बट जनरली फॉर द 15 markers, if your pattern is following a specific sequence, you need to do this, otherwise you're going to lose marks, but only if the question is sort of, अब ये तो नहीं कर सकते ना कि ये if statement आप end में check कर दे, so that sort of sequence will be marked and it's going to lose you marks if you don't do it the right way. Sir, could we use repeat loop here for as it is used for validation? No, you are not required to use the repeat loop. Why? Because the question says that if the value is invalid, फिर आपने फिर से input नहीं लेना, you just need to exit the procedure. So we need to implement something where, like, if it is valid, do something, if not, just output a message that it's wrong and then end procedure. You don't need to do anything else. That repeat loop is perfectly fine, but that's only if the question stated that you need to retake the value if it's incorrect. The question says that if it's not valid, you just output and exit the procedure. So for that reason, we will not be making use of the repeat loop. Say, next question, sir, I don't understand what patient hospital name. Correct? Did you join a bit late? I guess मेरे ख्याल से आप late आपने join की है. सो इफ यू हैवंट, सो देखो जो हॉस्पिटल पेशेंट नेम है, ये हमने जो यहाँ पे अरे शुरू में बनाया था उसका नाम पेशेंट था, एंड पेशेंट हॉस्पिटल नंबर बेसिकली व्हाट इट डज इज इट गोज टू दैट 1D अरे एंड इट रिटर्न्स मी द स्पेसिफिक नेम एट दैट स्पेसिफिक इंडेक्स व्हिच इज माय हॉस्पिटल नंबर. सो ये जो पेशेंट अरे है जो कि क्वेश्चन में मेंशन्ड है, दैट दिस स्टोर्स द नेम्स ऑफ द पीपल, राइट? यू सी, सो दैट इज व्हाई व्हेन वी आर ट्राइंग टू आउटपुट द नेम वी सॉर्ट ऑफ राइट इट दिस वे. देन वी हैव अ क्वेश्चन फ्रॉम हमजा IGSCE. क्या नाम है हमजा भाई, गुड नेम. Hamza IGSCE. Hamza IGS. Sir, when it is written, you do not need to initialize data in the array. We don't take an input. Yes, you don't take an input. And then we have a question from Abiha. In most of these 15 markers, आपको बहुत ही ज़रूरत नहीं पड़ेगी to take an input. सही है? Abiha, I guess your question has also been answered. For all those जिनके question answer हो रहे, please lower your hands so that बाकियों को भी मौका मिल सके. Sir, if the question was about writing a normal pseudocode without procedure, then do we write the same code just without the first line? Yes, Mariam, बिल्कुल. We write the whole code without this first line. Then Iman. Sir, the entire question is one procedure, then we call not a full code. The question never asks you to call. यहाँ पे कहीं पे लिखा है कि आपने कॉल भी करना है प्रोसीजर को. We read the entire question, right? हमने कहीं पे भी ये नहीं देखा that you need to call it because the question doesn't say कि कॉल करना है. You just need to write a procedure. तो बस हम प्रोसीजर लिखेंगे, बाकी एग्जामिनर का काम है वो कॉल करे ना करे उनकी मर्जी है. सही है. Sir, why did you use and for if statement? Because I remember we use it for boolean only. No, you use and statement whenever you have a condition that okay, ये चीज भी हो and at the same time this should be true and at the same time this should be true. So we are saying that the temperature should be greater than 31.6 and the temperature should be less than 37.2. This means temperature is normal and your pulse is greater than 55 and your pulse is less than 100. So all the four values are within the perfect range. सही है. Then we have another question. काफी हो गए हैं, but let's see. I'm just going to take one more question. बाकियों के inshallah we're going to address more questions again. Sir, can we write comments inside of the page but inside the arrow so it gets scanned and use arrows as well? Yeah, generally it's recommended to write comments with the perfect syntax, वो जिसके लिए आपको ये डालना पड़ेगा. So if you do something like arrows and blah 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 stuff, please avoid that stuff. It just confuses the examiner. We don't want to confuse the examiner. Okay, guys, काफी questions कर लिए. We're gonna take the other questions later on. Now for all those जिनके questions address नहीं हुए, don't worry, I'm gonna stay back at the end. उधर भी पूछ सकते हो. Otherwise, you all have my WhatsApp number. You can reach out to me on that. Just write down your question. बाद में भेज देना. I can explain it to you later on again. सही है. So now let's continue on to with what we are trying to do. By the way, आप लोग को मेरी एक second, let me pin my webcam too. Can you guys see my screen and my webcam now? कोई रुको. Just send a what do we call it? Thumbs up. What do you call it? Reaction. Okay, perfect, Ryan. Thank you. Thank you. All right, now let's move on. So now in the question, we need to sort of implement we need to continue with what we are trying to do. अब हमने एक part कर दिया. We did the output normal reading. Now we need to do the second part where it says that you need to output warning. Warning कब होगी? When one of the two values is out of range. So either I say that my temperature is within the perfect range, but my pulse is outside the range. So pulse is cross. Or I say my temperature is cross, but my pulse is perfect. So I need to implement something like this, and in between I have a or condition. Either ये होगा or this is going to happen, and either way दोनों में से कोई भी हो जाए, I need to output that there is a warning. अब इसको कैसे करते हैं? Let's do the first part. So if this thingy is true, good to go. If it's not, तो आप क्या करेंगे? We need to first of all end this if statement. So this if statement started up here, so it's better कि you also follow the indentation rule. So just beneath from where you started the if, you always write end if. So we're gonna write this end if, and now I'm gonna restart with the new if statement. I'll be like, okay, let's recheck for this case that temperature is within the right range, but pulse is out of the correct range. So how will I do that? I'll be like, okay, if अगेन अब टेम्परेचर की रीडिंग में कैसे चेक करूंगा? इफ इट्स विद इन द नॉर्मल रेंज, सेम टू सेम स्टेटमेंट एज अबव. इफ द रीडिंग्स with the index hospital num 1, hospital num 1, and at the same time is basically greater than or equal to 31.6, and my hospital number, again because we don't have space, let's write it up here. If my readings, इसको थोड़ी सी जगह, because you have the 15 if statement starting up here, so it's better to leave a bit space. Always follow this indentation rules. It makes your code easier to read. Remember, it makes your code easier to read and easier to maintain. This can come as a theoretical question too. Now what's the benefit of indentation? Remember, it makes your code easier to read and also maintain. And then if your temperature is at the same time also less than and equal to 37.2, this indicates that my temperature is within the perfect range, which means that मैंने ये बात तो कर ली है. But now I need to see whether but now I need to write code which checks and ensures that the pulse is outside the range. Now if I want to check that the pulse is outside the range, this basically means that my value should not be greater than or equal to 55, but it should be less than 55, and my value should be greater than 100, right? So this basically means that my pulse will be out of range when, so if I go back to my model, I can see that my pulse is going to be outside the range, outside, when the value is either less than 55, I can clearly see it, right? Or the value is greater than 100. If it's between these two, फिर तो perfect है. But if it's less than 55 or greater than 100, फिर मसला है. And just like that, if my temperature, if I want to go and check whether my temperature is outside the range, if it needs to be less than 31.6 or it needs to be greater than 37.2. So in this logic को अब हमने नीचे use करना है. So I'd be like, okay, now let's grab those pulse values. How will I do that? So if readings blah 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 is this, and at the same time, now to grab the pulse values readings hospital number, but now because I'm trying to grab the pulse values are stored at column number 2. So go to column number 2, and if that value at column number 2 is less than 55, or I say rather than and, क्योंकि and पिछली दफा हम इसलिए कर रहे थे क्योंकि value needs to be greater than 55 and at the same time it needs to be less than 100 to be perfect. But right now we see that it could be either less than 55 or this value of readings is basically greater than 100. Either way, if any of this happens, this means that my pulse is out of range, right? Then this means that this condition of pulse is no longer in the correct range. So my pulse is now outside the correct range. अब ये तो एक part हो गया. Okay, clearly seen that I've sort of implemented one part, but then at the same time I also need to check कि यार okay, if my temperature is higher and at the same time my temperature is let's say lower, तो ये तो मैंने एक case देख लिया कि temperature is between the perfect range, but now my pulse is not within the perfect range, right? Guys, just give me a second. My friend is calling. Just give me a minute. Okay. All right. Sorry for the disturbance, but yeah. So right now, because we can clearly see that my temperature is within the perfect range, but my pulse might be out of the range. This means that I should output what? I should output that my pulse is outside the range. Why? Because they clearly mentioned that, bro, whenever one of the values is outside the range, you should output what value is outside the range. And you should specify that, okay, there is a warning. And what warning? The warning for pulse. So because pulse is outside the range. So अब मैं क्या करूँगा? I would be like, okay, then if this case happens, then you need to basically output what? Warning. And what warning? Because the warning is for pulse, because pulse is out, I'm going to write pulse up here. Up, it's better I also add a comment up here so the examiner knows. So ये then के बाद जो जगह होती है, this is a pretty good spot. यहाँ पे लिख दो pulse reading out of range, pulse reading out of range. Say, I'm going to show one other tip for you all at the end once the entire code is done for comments के comments के एक और technique क्या है. Now we have done one part. We know that okay अगर pulse out होगी तो ये होगा, which means that done. I'm again going to write end if up here. But now this has completed one part of it. The second part is that what if I say that pulse is within the right range, but temperature is out of the correct range. So now the same thing, but rather than doing it for pulse, I'm going to do it for temperature. Again, let's start off with an if statement. Let's do it with the green route. I'm going to start with if, and I'm going to be like, okay, if this readings value for the hospital number, but at index number one, hospital num, but for so index number one or column number one, if this value, generally we say that if this value is less than 31.6 or greater than 37.2, so it's invalid. So I'll be like, if this value is less than 31.6 or this readings value of hospital number, again column number one, hospital num, column number one is greater than 37.2, this means my temperature values are, those are out of range. So temp out. अब आपने उधर ये नहीं बनाना, this is just for your own understanding, सही, उधर नहीं बनाना, वैसे ही पता होना चाहिए, right? So this means temperature is out, but at the same time I also want that my pulse is within the right range. So I'd be like, and at the same time, now to ensure that the pulse is within the right range, I'd be like, okay, readings, but rather than the column number one, I would be like, okay, if the readings hospital num dash 2 comma 2 is basically greater than or equal to 55, and because now it's with the perfect range, valid range, so it needs to be between 55 and 100, right? So if it is greater than and equal to 55 and my readings for hospital num 2 is basically less than or equal to 100, then this means that okay, it's pretty fine, that my pulse is perfectly fine but temperature is out. So then I would be like, okay, then in that case do something, and I'm going to add a comment next to it that temp reading temperature, temp ki jagah temperature pura likho, temperature reading is out of range, is out of range, and then I can output that, okay, output what, there is a warning but temperature. So or I can even write it this way, temperature warning, temperature warning, and we are good to go. Just like this, एक और बात ज़हन में रखना that a lot of times when students are writing output statements, wherever in paper number 2 you're trying to do it, sometimes students are like output, and rather than adding these double quotation, they write something like single quotation. So output XYZ. Remember, this single quotation is wrong because single quotation is for character. Because this entire thingy is a sentence which is a string, we always include double quotation marks for our strings. ये एक important point है, ये ज़हन में must रखना. And then we are done with temperature warning. So I'm again going to implement something like an end if. And just like that, now I would be implementing a model which checks that whether both the values are out of the range or not. So we have done this, we have done this, we have done this. Now it's time for severe warning and exiting the procedure. So same to same thingy again, but this time both the values need to be outside the range. So I'm going to add a comment first, checking if both values are out of range. If both values are out of range. And now to check it, I'm going to again make use of the if statement. I'm going to see if the readings hospital number, hospital num, comma 1, which is my temperature, is basically less than 31.6, which is for invalid range, or at the same time, my readings temperature place, which is hospital num 1 again is basically greater than 37.2. This means my temperature is incorrect. So I want that both my temperature is out, so temp is also cross, and also my pulse is cross. So I don't want an or in this case, I want that both of them. So I'd be like, if temp भी cross हो and pulse भी cross हो. So rather than putting a or the way we were doing, like previously भी कहीं पे मैंने यहाँ पे और यूज किया, राइट? अच्छा अच्छा, एंड ये यहाँ पे कहीं पे कहाँ पे किया है? अच्छा अच्छा, वो नहीं, बस से इजी सी ना वो हो गया था. सो यू सी जनरली व्हेन वी यूज और अप हेयर एंड ब्ला 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 स्टफ, इस केस के अंदर बिकॉज वी वांट that temperature reading is out of the range and the pulse reading is also out of the range. Now to divide the temperature and the pulse one, I'm going to be like, okay, temperature out of range, and now I'll be writing the pulse value. So pulse की क्या होगी? Again readings. गाइस सबके क्वेश्चन होंगे. लेट मी जस्ट एंड दिस होल थिंग ही, एंड फिर जिसके क्वेश्चंस और डिटेल में डिस्कस करेंगे. हॉस्पिटल नाम, but this time column number 2 is basically less than 55, or I say that my readings hospital num, but this time comma again 2, because it's what my column number 2 is basically greater than 100. Then this will mean that both the values are out of the range, and I would be like, okay, then output what? Then output what? Severe warning. And boom, you do this and you're done with the 4 conditions. You add an end if, and now if you go back to the requirements part, you can clearly see that we have covered up the 4 requirements. Ab kya karna hai? We need to exit the procedure, but one thing, we have been now at this point, no need to hurry, right? Whenever you're solving a 15 marker, try to go through from the start of the pair. So you can see that we had an if statement, which means that I also need to add an else statement if the value was outside this range and it's not correct. So मैं फिर क्या करूंगा? I would be like, okay, if it's not within the correct range, then add an else statement and else output incorrect hospital number, incorrect hospital number, and boom, you add this, and then we end the procedure. How do we end the procedure? We have studied this in our chapter number 8. You write the keyword end procedure. So if the value is not correct, it's just going to output this, and then there is nothing next. It's just going to out end the procedure. And there you go, guys. We have successfully finished this 15 marker. Alhamdulillah, it was a pretty good 15 marker, but now you would have seen that a lot of you would understand this pretty well. Guys, you can hear me, right? आप लोग को आवाज तो आ रही थी ना, ऐसे ना हो कि आवाज ना आ रही हो. Can someone send a thumbs up again? Okay, perfect, Iman. Thank you. So, because we created this model in front of us, this rough work, I can assure you that the whole problem was just solved because we created this rough work. अब अगर आप इसको नहीं बनाओगे and you just read the question and start coding, bro, even understanding what to write up here, what to write up here will be very challenging. So whenever you're solving a 15 marker, take out 1 hour for it. Out of that 1 hour, try to first spend the first 15 minutes making this rough model and spend the remaining 45 minutes. Now, you can see the point at the point when we started the 15 marker writing code, that was literally like 15-20 minutes. So we just spent 20 minutes to write the entire code. The major time was spent up here. So you can easily write the code very fast. It's not a big deal. But identifying what values to plug in, what values to take is the main case. Once you're done with the whole 15 marker, revise it once, and then at the end, now it's time we do the commenting part. So आपने करना क्या, जहां पे भी जगह मिले ना, कोई comment डाल देना. So now up here I would be like, okay, output incorrect. So यहाँ पे comment डाल दिया. If hospital number is outside the range, number is outside the range. So examiner knows that, okay, it's outside the range. So that is why this person outputted this. Okay, perfect. Then I can add a comment. Let's say बाकी जगहों में तो हमने डाले हुए हैं, but for instance, I might want to output the name first, right? So I can even add one up here. I would be like, okay, add up here. Hospital number is valid. Hospital number is valid. And to be honest, this much is more than enough. So this is how you can attempt a perfect 15 by 15 question. In this, how will the marks be divided? You will be getting 9 marks. Now listen up, a lot of school teachers even don't know this important thingy. 9 marks are for logic. 9 marks are for logic. So all this logic of this number, blah, 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 less than, or, and is basically for 9 marks. So we have 9 marks for logic. And then we have the other 6 marks for 3 things. It's for basically your, what do we call it? Comments. then it's basically for your meaningful identifiers. So all those who were saying कि sir हम इसको hn ले सकते हैं hn, so if you take hn as the parameter, you're going to lose marks in the meaningful identifiers part. If your 15 marker expects you that whenever you create an array, variable, parameter, whatever you are trying to take, you take it with a name which is meaningful, which means कि आप उसका नाम पढ़ोगे आपको पता लग जाए ये करना क्या चाह रहा है. So we call such an identifier as a meaningful identifier. So if you take hn, by hn से क्या होगा? I don't know what's hn. hn could be anything. Hospital number, it could be hujra number, it could be literally anything, right? So for that reason, house number maybe. So it does not explain what you are trying to do. So that's not a meaningful identifier. If you want to keep a meaningful identifier, it's important you give it a proper name. Otherwise, you're going to lose marks up here too. And of course, your code needs to follow a specific sequence. So that sequence up here is that we made use of this if statement first to check whether it's valid or not. If it is valid, you do all that other part. If it's not valid, you just output this and boom, you're end. And you ended the procedure. And that is how you sort of solve this 15 marker. And this sort of ends our today's discussion, alhamdulillah. And I'm going to turn on the chat box for all of you who might have had questions जो कि आंसर नहीं हो सके. आराम से guys, easy, 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 easy. No need to rush. सही है. So we had a question from Hamza. Hamza, you can send me a question. सबसे पहले आपका question address करते हैं. सर और क्यों नहीं लगाया और कहाँ पे आपने लगाना है, तो वो तो मेरे ख्याल से मैंने address कर दिया है. Is this your question और कहीं सिर्फ Hamza is और वाला ही आपको question? सर एंड आपने लगाया एंड कहाँ पे मैंने यार सी व्हाई डिड आई पुट एन एंड बिकॉज मैं चाहता हूं कि टेम्परेचर की रीडिंग्स आर आउट ऑफ रेंज एंड दूसरी तरफ पल्स की रीडिंग भी तो आउट ऑफ रेंज. सो आई से दैट इफ आई वांट टू टेक टेम्परेचर रीडिंग्स आउट ऑफ रेंज कब होगी? व्हेन माय टेम्परेचर इज आइदर लेस देन 31.6 और माय टेम्परेचर्स आर ग्रेटर देन 37.2. ये तो मतलब है मेरा टेम्परेचर इनवर्ट है एंड एट द सेम टाइम आई वांट कि मेरी पल्स इज आउट ऑफ रेंज or my pulse is greater than 100, which is again out of range. So this and basically means that दोनों values out of range हो, but in between this needs to be true कि ये भी out of range हो and ये भी out of range हो. That is why in between I've been making use of and कि like okay this is in range and at the same time this is out of range, and likewise this is in range and this is also in range. That is why when we are trying to connect the two we are making use of and. So yeah, so now the next question is from Iman. Let's see. So Iman says, sir, why can't we combine temp warning and pulse warning in one statement? Because the question clearly mentioned, that's a pretty good question, that whenever you're trying to output the warning part, you need to tell me what is the reason behind that. So you need to specify कि यार ये जो warning हम करें, is it because of pulse or is it because of temperature? Now the point which you are trying to say कि sir ये तो दोनों में एक ही बात है, why not I combine these two parts together by even extending this and maybe I write or at the same time this thing happens, then output warning. In that case, you will not be sure whether the warning is caused by a pulse or whether the warning is caused by a temperature. For that reason, we need to sort of implement it separately. सही है? So जो question address हो रहे guys, lower the hands please. Sir, where you were getting only one out of range like pulses or temperature where you wrote the code for warning pulse, then couldn't you have done else if output warning temperature instead of just rewriting the code? Now the thing is, this question which you are trying to say up here, you अब हमारे यहाँ पे एक condition हो रही है. Say it checks that if temperature is within the perfect range and at the same time my pulse is outside the range. Now if I do else, तो भाई यहाँ पे दो cases हो सकते हैं. एक तो ये है कि I say that my temperature is अच्छा, इवन इफ यू मेक यूज ऑफ एल्स अप हियर, एल्स अगर आप यहाँ पे यूज कर सकते हो, एल्स में आपके पास दो केसेस हो सकते हैं. व्हाट इफ आई से दैट दिस केस, इन केस का एल्स एक ही हो सकता है ना. द एल्स विल बी दैट व्हाट इफ आई एज्यूम दैट माय पल्स रेट इज आल्सो करेक्ट. So like up here, I took the assumption, right, that my temperature is perfect, but my pulse is wrong. So if this is not the case, तो दूसरा केस क्या हो सकता है? एक केस तो ये हो सकता है कि my temperature is incorrect and my pulse is correct. एक केस ये हो सकता है कि temp भी incorrect हो, my pulse is also incorrect. And at the same time एक केस ये भी हो सकता है कि temp भी सही हो and pulse भी सही हो. तो आप else के बाद कौन सी कंडीशन को cater करोगे? You can only cater one, but आपके पास तो तीन कंडीशंस बन सकती है. So for that reason we are sort of implementing it separately, अलग 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 तरीकों से. सही है? Next question is, sir, if we can use if else if statement for all conditions. तो ये इफ एल्स इफ ही हो रहा है, बट एल्स का यही है कि एल्स आपको इसीलिए नहीं यूज करना है कि अगर आप एल्स स्टेटमेंट को यूज करोगे तो उसके अंदर आपको ये मसला मिलेगा कि अगर आपने यहाँ पे एल्स इसके बाद ऐड किया तो भाई एल्स में दो केसेस हो सकते हैं। व्हाट इफ आई से कि एल्स के बाद आप फिर इफ, एल्स के बाद भी आपको फिर इफ ही लगाना पड़ेगा। सो इट्स देयर इज नो यूज ऑफ एडिंग एल्स if you want to do it that way कि आप end if की जगह you might want to add a else then again an if statement reading and blah blah blah, that's also fine. Otherwise you can also do it this way: you end an if statement and you start another if statement. So if you want to make use of else if else if, that's also fine, that's fine. Okay, all right, next question is from, अच्छा जिसके भी क्वेश्चन हैंड रेज करने से क्योंकि मैं बारी बारी उस तरीके से देख रहा हूँ। So the pulse and temperature value isn't moving on the next value. How do we move it to the next index? नहीं नहीं, आपने move ही नहीं करना ना. The question doesn't say कि आपने move करना है. The question is like, bro, I'm gonna give you the input for some specific patient. उसका number बताऊंगा, बस आपने मुझे उस person के status बताना है. So you just need to check the patient status and let me know normal है, warning है, severe warning है. तो आपने आगे पीछे जाना ही नहीं है. Read the question because this is really important. ऐसे गलती अगर आप लोग करें तो it's gonna be very very harmful, right? So we have a question from Usaid. Sir, how would you rate this 15 marker on a scale of 1 to 10 on a difficulty? To be honest, this will be round about 5 6. Say this is relatively an easier one, I must say. Say इससे मुश्किल भी आएंगे. But now the thing is, if a 15 marker is difficult, then you should be aware कि उसका threshold भी drop होगा. Now, if a 15 marker like this comes up, the threshold can rise up. And the highest I have ever seen a threshold is going up to like 125. So 125 is still not that high. For in the most recent 2025, May June 25, you know there was a problem with the 15 marker and everyone was awarded a perfect 15 by 50. Even after everyone got a perfect 15 by 15, the threshold was just 125. So even if a very easy 15 marker comes up, you can expect the threshold for an A star around 120. So tension nahi leni. Keep your other stuff good. हो जाएगा. 15 marker is not that difficult. आ जाते हैं marks. सही है. Then we have a question from Huzefa. सर ये बाकियों 15 मार्क्स के मुकाबले में आसान है या हमारे कॉन्सेप्ट अच्छी तरह बैठ गए? ये दोनों केसेस हैं, वरना जनरली अगर आप अभी देखना जो हमारे बाकी भी 15 मार्कर्स होंगे ना, उनको हम इसी तरीके से एक मॉडल बना के एक्सप्लेन करेंगे। जब आप मॉडल बना के सॉल्व करते हो ना, हर 15 मार्कर ईजी है। यही तो मैं आप लोग को समझाने की कोशिश कर रहा हूँ। जो आप लोग के जहन में ये बात बैठी है ना कि 15 मार्कर कोई बहुत बड़ी बला है, कोई बला नहीं है। आप इस तरीके से उसको पहले डाइसेक्ट करके पार्ट्स में डिवाइड करें, इजी थिंग है। एवरीवन इज गोना एस द 15 मार्कर इंशाल्लाह इफ यू जस्ट फॉलो दिस मेथड। Clear? So next we have a question from Kurat. Okay. Said the last else you used is for the festive. Yep. Sir, can you please show the marking scheme for the question? I can share the marking scheme later on. आप लोग वहां से पे review कर देना. सही है. Next question is from Aish. Let's take it from Aish. Okay. So where do we put the hospital number? Can you explain the first if statement? The first if statement checks whether the number is within the range. So हम जो hospital number ले रहे हैं, that's a parameter. And the question said that this number needs to be between 1 and 1000. So we're basically checking whether it is following this range in this first statement up here. सही है? So ये वो check हो रहा है यहाँ पे. फॉर ऑल दोस्त जिनके क्वेश्चन एड्रेस हो रहे हैं गाइस, आई वुड अप्रिशिएट अगर हैंड्स लोअर डाउन कर दो, वरना बाकियों को फिर मौका नहीं मिले। सर डोंट वी हैव टू पुट एन एंड इफ एट द लास्ट बिफोर एंडिंग प्रोसीजर? डिडंट आई पुट दैट? Okay, yes, thank you very much Bilal, you're perfectly fine. By the way, even if you miss this end if, इससे कोई मार्क्स इतने कट नहीं होंगे, but it's recommended. Yeah, perfect, thank you. आपने यहाँ पे एक एंड इफ भी डाल देना है बिकॉज वी वर यूजिंग एन इफ स्टेटमेंट, सो एक एंड इफ भी डाल दिया। सो दीज माइनर सिंटेक्स एरर्स दे वोंट कॉस्ट यू अ लॉट ऑफ मार्क्स, डोंट वरी। बट या, थैंक यू वेरी मच फॉर दैट। Next question is, we need to input. No, you don't need to input anything. It's like a procedure is being created. Procedure में आप कुछ input नहीं करते, you take a parameter and whatever the parameter is, it's being used आगे 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 आगे। Now let's take the question. Sir, can we ask the user to enter the hospital number to make the code more efficient? Why are you sort of taking an input when the input is already as a parameter? ये जो parameter आ रहे हैं ना, this parameter is sort of an input. Now, how do you call a procedure? You would have studied this, right? You call a procedure. Now, we don't have to call it up here, but generally, if you want to call a procedure, you do something like call check patient, and then you specify the hospital number up here. So you're going to be like call check patient and you put the number like 25. So this 25 is now going to go in this point, and jahan pe bhi aapka hospital number use hua hai, that is going to have the value of 25. If you don't get this point, this basically means that your conceptual understanding of procedures and functions is weak. I would recommend revising that first. We have a few 15 markers uploaded, just I guess one or two, so you can view that if you just want to have an idea of it. So move it. So some 15 markers have so many variables, so should we declare them? Inshallah, once we get to those 15 markers, मोहित हम वहाँ पे कर लेंगे बिल्कुल easily, सब अच्छे से हो जाएगा, सही है. Just so that everybody know, this was the last demo class. If you're interested in joining our past paper session, we're going to simplify everything just like the way we did it today. जैसे आज आप लोगों को मजा है 15 mark करके, just like that we're going to make every single 15 marker easy like that. So if you want to join in the past paper session, I'm sharing the link in the chat box with everybody. आप लोग वहां से भी join in कर सकते हैं. If you have filled out the form, perfecto. If you haven't filled out the form, you can fill it right now. Tia will get in touch with you. But I can assure you that inshallah, if you plan on giving it your best and you take these classes and also prepare at your end, ए स्टार वाली प्रिपरेशन होगी इंशाल्लाह, ए स्टार वाली, सही है. सो अहमद, we had, okay, Ahmed, I can't find your name by the way. Ahmed, how do you open up his chat? So if I didn't finish the rest of the question, other than the 15 mark and 41 and the 1 hour left, do I just leave whatever I'm doing and jump? नहीं 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 नहीं, पहले आप फर्स्ट 60 मार्क को मैक्सिमाइज करो. फर्स्ट 60 मार्क्स को आपने करने 15 मार्क में जितना होते हैं उसमें आप थोड़ा भी लिखो, कुछ ना कुछ मिल जाएगा. ये ना हो कि आप सिर्फ 15 मार्क, लाइक इट्स लाइक व्हाई विल यू लीव 60 मार्क्स फॉर जस्ट 15 मार्क्स, यू नो. इफ यू कवर अप द फर्स्ट 60 मार्क्स परफेक्टली एंड यू मिस अप द एंटायर 15 मार्क, फिर भी ए स्टार आ सकता है. इट्स रियली पॉसिबल इफ योर P1 इज ऑल्सो डन द राइट वे. Okay, guys, जिनके questions हो रहे हैं, lower your hand. Sir, is it necessary to mention comment? Yes, it is necessary to mention comment. Marks होते हैं 15 marker के अंदर, sir, but in exam we don't have much time. You do have. This explanation which I created today, ये तो मैंने वैसे ही आप लोग के लिए इतना expand कर दिया. For me, if I want to do it, I would be just making it something like this. Okay, patient, I would be like, okay, 1, 2, 3. I'm just gonna write hospital number in front of it. Then I'm gonna make one other 2D array, and उसमें मैं बोल दूंगा this is one temp and this is 2 column, and then I would be like, okay, this is again hospital num. So just make a rough sketch in front of you, and over time once you start practicing, this was the first class, so because of that I want to keep everything slow. But as we get closer to CIs, I'm going to try to do it in a faster pace so that you can understand कि okay, एग्जाम केस के अंदर क्या क्या तरीका करना है. उधर आपने इतना नीटली नहीं करना, सही है. बट दिस इज जस्ट टू मेक यू अंडरस्टैंड दैट until or unless you don't make this model, it's, to be honest, very difficult to solve. सही है. So yep, back to the next question. So the next question will be from Mishal. Just a minute, Mishal. What is meant by parameter? Parameter is basically the input which you provide to a procedure. This value which you're taking as an input, this is known as a parameter. Guys, such questions basically show the lack of your understanding. अब ये कोई बुरी बात नहीं है, अच्छी बात है कि आपको पता लग रहा है कि you're lacking at some point. So now it's your duty कि अब आप आगे इसके बाद ना जाके इसको रिवाइज भी एक दफ़ा मस्ट रिवाइज करने के प्रोसीजर्स के अंदर पैरामीटर्स क्या होते हैं, फंक्शंस के अंदर पैरामीटर्स क्या होते हैं. आई विल शेयर दिस ऑन द ग्रुप, डोंट वरी, सब शेयर हो जाएगा. Guys, if I've answered your question, please lower your hands. Say question from Javeria. Oh, Javeria, काफी ज़्यादा. Sir, can you explain the first line of the code? First line, this is basically saying that you are creating a procedure, and I gave that procedure the name check patient, which is going to be taking a parameter, and that parameter name is hospital number, which will be of the data type integer. If you also don't understand this, I would again recommend you can reach out to me later on. मैं आपको procedures and functions की videos भी भेज दूंगा, आप वो मस्त देख लें, क्योंकि फिर आपको समझ आएगी कि हो क्या रहा है. No problem. You can lower your hand, guys, if your question was answered. So yeah, if it's not, so now let's go back. Sir, in your session, do we have to pay 14K per month, per 2 months, or just one? No, 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 no. If you plan on joining the computer science session, the 14,000 will be just for for the entire session. सही है? So 14,000 for the entire session. आपने 2 महीने नहीं करना. For the other sciences, for chemistry, for physics, you are required to pay it twice. For the April month and also the May month. For computer science, it's just going to be for 1 month. You need to pay for April, and I will be giving you free access. We will be having free access classes for all of you for the next 15 days. क्या याद रखोगे? 15 दिन free में पढ़ लेना. Just join in for this 1 month and inshallah you will be good to go. सही है? Then we have a question from Rayan. So, sir, but अगर HN को शुरू में हॉस्पिटल नंबर बता दिया हो, then meaningful name नहीं होगा. होगा, बट इट्स स्टिल बेटर. देखो, इट्स स्टिल बेटर कि आप प्रॉपर मीनिंगफुल नेम यूज करें, क्योंकि इफ एन एग्जामिनर इज आस्किंग यू टू मेक यूज ऑफ मीनिंगफुल नेम एंड आप स्टिल नहीं करते, सो व्हाई डू यू वांट टू पुट दैट रिस्की एलिमेंट टू इट, राइट? सो इट्स रियली इंपॉर्टेंट कि आप वो तरीके से करें. सर, इन आउटपुट वार्निंग टेम्प आउट पल्स इन, विल दिस बी करेक्ट? वार्निंग टेम्प आउट पल्स इन, विल दिस बी करेक्ट? आउटपुट नहीं 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 नहीं, यू डोंट नीड टू आउटपुट द होल टेम्प आउट पल्स इन वाली कहानी। आपने सिर्फ बताना है कि यार टेम्परेचर इज आउट, so you just need to say temperature warning basically is telling the person कि भाई temperature is out of range। so आपने कोई ये नहीं बताना कि temperature out pulse in blah 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 कहानी, you just need to be direct क्योंकि temperature is out, so मतलब temperature की value incorrect है। and for statement can I use this temp in pulse out फॉर स्टेटमेंट कैन आई यूज दिस टेम्प इन पल्स आउट, किस तरीके से टेम्प इन पल्स आउट, नहीं नहीं नहीं, आपने टेम्प इन पल्स आउट नहीं यूज करना। जिस तरीके से हमने यहाँ पे किए कि अगर आप कोई चीज इसके अंदर खुद से डालना चाहते हैं तो वो गलत होगा। यू नीड टू आउटपुट एग्जैक्टली व्हाट द एग्जामिनर आस्क्ड यू टू आउटपुट, सो द एग्जामिनर आस्क्ड अस टू आउटपुट नॉर्मल रीडिंग या वार्निंग फॉर पल्स, वार्निंग फॉर टेम्परेचर, तो आपने उसी लिहाज से ही करना है। क्लियर। एंड फाइनली हुजैफा का क्वेश्चन है। हुजैफा, ओ हो भाई भाई भाई, सर फ्री क्लासेस रखेंगे आप इस मंथ, मुश्किल है, वी वॉन्ट बी कीपिंग फ्री क्लासेस मोस्ट प्रोबेबली एनी मोर, बिकॉज अब इसके बाद जो पास पेपर सेशन के लिए रजिस्टर होंगे दे विल हैव द एक्सक्लूसिव एक्सेस टू ऑल ऑफ आवर कंटेंट, एंड ईयरली प्रैक्टिस भी मेरे साथ उनकी रोज़ाना होगी, एंड सब कुछ गुड सीन हो जाएगा। सर आपने मई का कहा था, मई के अंदर वी माइट कंडक्ट 1 2 फ्री क्लासेस आप लोग के लिए जस्ट बिफोर योर एग्जाम, बट यू लाइक द मैराथन्स वी हैव बीन कंडक्टिंग, वो अब पास्ट पेपर सेशंस के लिए एक्सक्लूसिव हो जाएगा जस्ट बिफोर द एग्जाम। लेट्स सी, आप लोग को हेल्प करने के लिए फॉर दोज हु माइट नॉट बी विलिंग टू ज्वाइन इन, हम कुछ करेंगे schedule for the session, so the classes are going to be from Monday to Friday, perhaps Saturday we're going to have 6 classes per week inshallah। Saturday one will be something which will be only conducting अगर हमें लगा कि ज़रूरत पड़ रही है for an extra class, but 6 classes per week, Rosanna 10 p.m. to 11:30 p.m. and it's going to go from the Monday 30th April all the way till your Cambridge CIs. We're going to do as many papers as possible. So it's not going to be कि मैं आपको अभी बता दूंगा कितने होंगे. I'm going to share what paper we'll be solving. I'm going to do as many papers, both P1s and P2 जितने हो सकते हैं. सही है. चलो. Finally, Ramin का एक question है. Ramin Fatma. What will be the timings? 10:30, sorry, 10 p.m. to 11:30. Same timings जो अभी डेमो के लिए follow हो रही है. All right, guys, I feel like we have then answered all the questions. Kurat ka ek question aa gaya. Let's answer that. Kurat. Sir, all the checks are being made for one value only, or will that be repeated and more inputs taken? Sir, we can use the AND operator for more than two conditions as well. बिल्कुल आप AND operators को more than two condition के लिए use कर सकते हो. But this depends upon the question. इस question के अंदर we only need to implement the check on one value, which is being inputted as a parameter. So whatever this parameter is going to be inputted, आपने सिर्फ उसी को check करना है. So it's for that reason we are just checking it once. Now this depends and it varies question to question, right? So जब इस तरह के बाकी questions आएंगे जहाँ पे use होगा तो हम वहाँ पे उसके relevant देखेंगे. For now it's not related up here. So guys, it's 11:43 p.m. We sort of have covered a 1 hour 45 minutes class. I hope you had a great learning experience and आपको मजा आया होगा. And this 15 marker was easy for you all to understand. I hope it was. If you have any questions, you might reach out to me later on. I'm very bad with replying on DMs, but the group will be opened up very soon. You can also make use of it. And for those who might not be even joining our past paper session, don't worry, group आपके लिए is going to be opened up. Go and engage with the 800 or 750 other kids we have in the class. And you can also opt for the other conceptual groups. वो भी free है community के अंदर जाके chemistry, physics, maths, biology वो भी आप ज्वाइनिंग कर सकते हैं to gain the most benefit out there. With that, this ends the mark of our 15 marker session and also our demo classes at conceptuals for the May-June 2026 session. See you all who have registered from Monday. Take care, everybody. Allah Hafiz. And दुआ में याद रखो. Bye bye. Allah Hafiz.